Humans are walking war crimes, and that's why they're not allowed in our wars. Professor Luther's declaration hung in the air as his class of alien students sat in stunned silence. The lecture hall, carved out of sleek metallic walls and bathed in the sterile glow of interstellar lights, seemed to vibrate with the weight of his words. Yes, the professor continued, his tone a mix of disgust and admiration. You may have heard rumors, wild tales of human savagery on the battlefield. But I assure you, the reality is far more disturbing. The classroom was filled with a diverse array of alien species, each one representing a different member of the Galactic Coalition. There was the seven-limbed Krika, whose large, multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly in what could only be interpreted as nervousness. The hulking Vosk, with his thick, armored hide, leaned forward in his seat, a frown creasing his ridged brow. Even the usually serene and emotionless Zelak, with their translucent jelly-like forms, seemed to ripple with unease. One student, a young Fcan with pale blue skin and 4 dexterous arms, raised a hand tentatively. But Professor Luther, aren't humans physically weaker than many of the species in the Coalition? How could they possibly be considered so dangerous? Luther turned his gaze to the student, his large dark eyes narrowing slightly. You see, it is not their physical strength that makes them dangerous. It is something far more insidious, something unexpected. The professor activated the holographic display behind him, and a series of images flickered to life. The first image was of a human soldier, clad in primitive body armor, standing atop a pile of rubble. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, and his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to transcend the image itself. This is a human during the Siege of Talver, one of the last conflicts they were involved in before the ban, Luther explained. Note the lack of advanced weaponry, the minimal armor. And yet this one man was responsible for the deaths of over 3,000 Scorn warriors in a single night. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. The Scorn were known for their resilience and ferocity in battle, their warriors standing nearly 9 feet tall with claws that could rend through steel. The idea that a single, seemingly under-equipped human could have caused such destruction was beyond comprehension. Another student, a reptilian Rakash, with scales that shimmered in shades of green and gold, hissed in disbelief. This is impossible. What kind of weapon did he use? Luther's expression darkened. No weapon, just his mind. Humans have an unparalleled capacity for violence and a disturbingly creative approach to warfare. They don't just fight, they adapt. They improvise. They find ways to turn even the most benign objects into instruments of death. He gestured to the next image, which showed the aftermath of the siege. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Scorn warriors, their massive forms lying in pools of dark, viscous blood. Among the dead were crude, improvised traps, sharp shards of metal tied to ropes, makeshift explosives rigged from scavenged materials, and pits filled with sharpened stakes. It wasn't just his combat prowess that caused the Scorn to fall, Luther continued. It was his ability to think differently, to see solutions where others saw only obstacles. And it is this very ability that makes humans so unpredictable, so dangerous. The class was silent, the weight of the professor's words settling over them like a heavy shroud. They had all heard stories of human cunning, but this was something else entirely. This was a calculated, almost animalistic instinct for survival at any cost, a trait that defied all conventional understanding of warfare. One of the students, a slender Aaron with bioluminescent markings that pulsed softly in the dim light, leaned forward, his voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. But if they are so dangerous, why not just eliminate them entirely? Surely the coalition could. Luther held up a hand, silencing him. Eliminate them? Easier said than done. The coalition did consider it once, but they quickly realized that humans, when threatened with extinction, become even more formidable. They fight like cornered beasts, with a tenacity that borders on madness. The more you push them, the more dangerous they become. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. No, the only solution was to ban them from participating in any future conflicts. It was the only way to ensure that their destructive potential could be contained. The errand student from earlier raised his hand again, his 4 fingers trembling slightly. But Professor, isn't it unjust to single out one species like this? Aren't we denying them the right to defend themselves? Luther sighed, his gaze softening slightly. It may seem unjust, but consider the alternative. Allowing humans to engage in galactic warfare would be akin to unleashing a force of nature, a force that even the most advanced species in the coalition cannot fully comprehend or control. It is not a question of justice, but of survival. The following day, the lecture hall was packed to the brim. Word had spread like wildfire throughout the campus about Professor Luther's revelations, and now every available seat was filled with students, their collective attention fixed on the front of the room. Some had even gathered in the aisles, their faces eager with anticipation. The tension was thick as they awaited the professor's arrival, their minds still reeling from the previous lecture. When Luth-Cor finally entered, the room fell silent almost instantly. He walked to the center of the hall, his movements measured and deliberate. For a moment he simply stood there, surveying the room as if gauging the readiness of his audience. "I see we have a few more attendees today," he remarked dryly, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I suppose you all want to hear more about the humans." Very well. He activated the holographic display once more, and the image of a planet appeared, a blue and green world, its surface crisscrossed with scars of war and conflict. "This," Luther began, "is Cadria for a former Scorn colony world. You may have heard of it in your history studies, but let me assure you, what happened here was nothing short of extraordinary. And it all began with the arrival of a single human unit." The image shifted to a group of human soldiers, their faces obscured by the visors of their helmets. They moved with a fluidity and coordination that spoke of years of training and discipline, their weapons held at the ready as they advanced through the dense jungle terrain. This was supposed to be a suicide mission, Luther explained. The coalition needed to delay the Scorn long enough for our main forces to regroup, and this human unit was tasked with holding them off. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded. He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. But instead of retreating or surrendering, the humans did something completely unexpected. They attacked. The display shifted again, showing the humans in the midst of battle. They moved like phantoms through the underbrush, their weapons spitting fire as they engaged the Scorn with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Despite their smaller numbers, the humans fought with a level of aggression and cunning that left the Scorn reeling. At first, the Scorn commanders were baffled. Luth-Cor continued. They couldn't understand how this tiny force was holding its ground, let alone pushing them back. But then they realized something even more disturbing. The humans were not just fighting for survival. They were enjoying it. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the classroom. The idea that anyone could find pleasure in the midst of such carnage was incomprehensible to most of the students, whose species had long since abandoned such primal instincts. Luth-Cor gestured to the display, which now showed a human soldier standing over the body of a fallen Scorn warrior. His chest heaved with exertion, but there was a wild, almost euphoric look in his eyes, as if he had tapped into something deep and primal within himself. "The humans called it the thrill of the hunt," Luther said, his tone tinged with something that might have been fear. "They would lure the Scorn into traps, picking them off one by one, always staying just out of reach. They turned the jungle into their own personal hunting ground, and for 3 days and nights, they waged a guerrilla war unlike anything the Scorn had ever seen." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. And then, on the 4th day, the humans vanished. The holographic display flickered, showing the aftermath of the battle. The jungle was littered with the bodies of Scorn warriors, their formidable strength rendered meaningless against the humans' hit-and-run tactics. But of the humans themselves, there was no trace. They had disappeared into the shadows, leaving only destruction in their wake. The Scorn believed they had been driven mad. Luth-Cor continued, that the humans had lost all sense of reason and were now little more than wild animals prowling the jungle in search of prey. They were so terrified that they abandoned the colony entirely, retreating to their ships and leaving Cadria to the humans. He turned to face the class, his expression grave. And that is how a single human unit, with no support and no reinforcements, managed to liberate an entire planet from one of the most feared species in the galaxy. The room was deathly quiet. The students who had come expecting to hear more about human brutality were now confronted with something far more unsettling. The realization that humans were not just dangerous because of their ability to kill. They were dangerous because they relished it. They had found a way to turn war itself into a game where the stakes were life and death, and where they always seemed to come out on top. One of the students, a young Zelak whose translucent body was trembling slightly, raised a tendril. "Professor, if the humans are so skilled in warfare, why don't they wage war on us? What stops them from conquering the galaxy?" Luth-Cor's expression softened slightly, and he let out a long, slow breath. "That, my dear students, is the question that haunts every member of the coalition. We don't know why they haven't turned their sights on us. Perhaps they are content to live in peace. Perhaps they are waiting for the right moment. Or perhaps they simply haven't found a worthy opponent yet." He let those words hang in the air, a chill reminder of the uncertainty that surrounded the humans. The class had come seeking answers, but all they had found were more questions that no one in the galaxy seemed to have the answers to. And as they sat there grappling with the implications of what they had learned, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The ban on human involvement in galactic war was not just a precaution. It was a desperate attempt to contain a force that, if unleashed, could very well change the fate of the entire galaxy.